has set on a truly extraordinary man, a masterful yet thoughtful leader, a suave yet firm diplomat, one who served the nation with dignity and honor, one whose wisdom and diplomatic finesse kept Kenya both relevant and neutral, even as the whole world was in the grips of the Cold War. A passing cloud that served with distinction for 24 years. A decisive and courageous commander-in-chief of formidable achievements, who chose well and always put his country first.
Indeed, that is the president of Moi. He said he's his personal mentor, and it's quite a bit of loss for him. But this is also the man that sort of made him politically. And it would appear that he was a man who groomed politicians, or young men who became politicians. And Isaac Ruto is an example. Do you think it was deliberate, or was it based on whether he likes you, or was it just an effort to get people to stand for him in different parts of the country?
No, I think Moi simply looked at you. Maybe he had his own way of looking at the potentials and even your own challenges, and he would try to help you to move forward. Because we couldn't understand when he was telling us when we joined the cabinet, a number of us at that time, that look, he had a belief that he was going to hand over to a younger generation.
Right.
And he kept telling us that you need to live up to the standards.
To be handed over to?
Yes, that you are supposed to be taking over from the older generations. And you see, for us, he was talking to us as a father, because our parents were his age mates. So for us, we had several steps below him.
What was that standard?
Because you see, he had been in government since 1963. That is 60s, when most of us were being born.
Right.
And we went through primary when he was vice president. We never even quite knew the other vice presidents. I cannot figure out when Jaramogi was vice president or Murumbi. We only knew Moi and Kenyatta. Those were permanent features. Now, by the time we were arriving, already our own mindset was that this is a huge figure we are dealing with that is far beyond us. So getting to know him personally and to interact would take time for us. But he kept on mentoring us, even in our own failures. A lot of people thought he was he was quick to punish. No. He would talk to you over. And even when you wronged him a number of times, the only word you needed to say was, sorry, Mzee.
Right.
You apologize.
Gentlemen, the fact that you are all products of his mentorship of KANU, one way or another, or a kingpin out of one of Moi's mentees on top of that. For you, Honorable Musalia, what do you think is going to be the future of Kenya's oldest party, the one that he ruled, KANU?
Well, frankly speaking, I'm not here to speak for KANU, and I would not want to attempt to speak for KANU. I think the future and how they intend to move forward will lie squarely with the members of KANU. But all I can say very quickly is that you see, President Moi was an individual who never wanted you to take public responsibility as child's play. He said, you know, the famous quotes, siasa mbaya, maisha mbaya. You know, such phrases. Simple tasks, but very loaded. Because Moi expected certain levels of decorum when you're in public office. Your conduct within public office had to be respectful.
Sorry, Honorable Mudavadi, just to take a look at what's happening on the screens. You can see the procession of the body of former President Daniel Moi is making its way into Parliament. Of course, this is the third day of public viewing, and this has been the norm since the first day, that is on Saturday, that procession from Lee Funeral Home all the way to Parliament, where, of course, the body is aboard the gun carriage, pulled by the gun carrier, and now it will be moved again into Parliament buildings. There will be preparations conducted to ensure that it's ready for viewing. It will be placed on the Speaker's walkway just at the entrance of the National Assembly, and that is where members of the public that may want to go and participate in that important occasion of public viewing, they'll have the opportunity until 5 p.m. today. So that's what's happening in Parliament currently. Of course, we'll be speaking to some of our reporters who will be at the Parliament buildings and even at Nyayo National Stadium, just to bring us to speed on what's the latest from those
preparations,
two sides.
yes, that are happening for tomorrow.
Right, and even as you continue to remember these, Kipruto Kirwa, so we see a trend in the appointments that were made by President Moi. Of course, after he became the acting president on the demise of founding father Jomo Kenyatta in 1978, he appointed Mwai Kibaki, who had been in government since 1963, if I'm not mistaken. But then thereafter, the people that were appointed to the position of vice president were fairly new into politics, because, for instance, George Saitoti, who succeeded Mwai Kibaki, came into politics in 1983 in an appointive capacity. Yes, he was appointed into that position, and 5 years later, after the 1988 election, he was made vice president. Then, after that, we saw Musalia Mudavadi, who was appointed in 1999. He had been in politics for 10 years, but immediately after he was elected, he was made a minister. I mean, what was this about? Because people today say that you need someone who has some experience to be appointed to certain positions. What was it with him and new persons in politics and positions, including yourself? And how he chose those individuals?
Well, possibly, I think Mheshimiwa Musalia was lucky. He became a minister within a short time. It took me 15 years to be a minister and 10 years to be assistant minister. Well, it doesn't mean that I'm a slow learner, but he was looking at the diversity of Kenya. Such that when he appointed him, he was looking at considerations beyond the individual to ensure that he is able to balance the heartbeat of the nation. He is also able to bring in new and old in certain combination. Remember that the Kenyatta cabinet, he did not sack them. He allowed them to suffer the natural attrition process, such that many individuals who were able to sustain the storm of the time, they stayed in the cabinet for quite some time. Remember, Mzee Kibaki became his vice president for 10 years.
Right.
And I think in his wisdom, Kibaki was a source of stability. And remember, even during the Kenyatta succession, Kibaki maintained a very neutral stand, a position that he held with a lot of respect. But subsequent to that, I think there was also a lot of politics that started setting in, because, as I said, Moi served under two critical periods. The first 10 years under the Cold War, where Africa was polarized into the East and the West. And at the end of the Cold War, resources in Africa, including Kenya, diminished. Agitation for multipartyism came in, and many other things were making the governance of the time very unstable. And that may explain the rapidity with which he was appointing a vice president. As you know, Karanja was assistant minister for a short time, and he was catapulted to the position of the vice president before he came down with the thumb. So some of these were the volatile situation of politics at that particular time.
Right.
And possibly his appointment, the appointment of Musalia Mudavadi, came in because KANU was almost ruptured by the Kasarani meeting.
Honorable Kipruto, would you say the fact that we also had the president there talking about how Moi was inheriting a government when the world in itself has just come from a world war. You look at Africa in the 1980s, a lot of African countries then still hadn't gained independence. They were still fighting for independence. So if you look at the political atmosphere for Africa as a continent then, would you say it had an influence, it had an impact with how he ruled Kenya back here at home? Because you would see President Moi going to certain countries to make sure that he's part of the peace accords that was happening on the African continent in the 1980s. So would you say Africa's political temperatures then influenced how he did his business back at home and who he put in his cabinet?
Yeah, you know, when history is written, it would be good to compare Moi with his contemporaries in Africa.
Right.
Remember the first set of 10 years that he was our president. Africa was replete with a lot of dictators, and many governments were overthrown. This is the period of coup and coup d'etats that took place in Africa.
Right.
But he was able to steer the ship. Remember also taking from a very huge figure like Jomo Kenyatta. Many of us, we did not know what would be next when we were told Mzee has passed on. And our prayer as Kalenjins, because the politics is tribal up to now in Africa, we were saying we wish they retain him at the position of the vice president.
Right.
Because we did not know that he was going to be the president.
Do you think Moi ruled with a firm hand like that because of where Africa was at that time and he could see it?
Firmness, yes, he was firm. But you see, when you listen to some of the commentators on TV and other stations, they are not giving Moi his due position in history. He could have decided to make Kenya something different. But he was able to give to the tradition, and that's why he said he was pursuing Nyayo. That is the footsteps of the founding father of this nation. Remember the two parties that came in at independence. One was about devolved government and another one was unitary government. That was also a source of conflict among the nations and nationalities of Kenya. And therefore Moi was able to midwife that process and allow Kenyans to look at themselves as one.
Okay. All right, you speak quite clearly about the kufuata Nyayo, but one wonders, Honorable Isaac Ruto, getting into the 90s especially, there are many ills and evils that have been spoken about, but I want to be specific on what happened just before Honorable Musalia Mudavadi was appointed to the National Treasury or the Finance Docket. The corruption incidences that we saw, the Golden Bag scandal, I mean, was this happening under the watch of a president who knew very well what was happening in his government? How did that escape his mind and his eyes?
I think a question like that one would best be answered by the former vice president, because he understood more around the financial situations then. But like when Akirwa is saying, a lot of these things sometimes are straight to give Moi some strange picture around his capacities. But in real terms, remember that that period there was even no foreign aid to this country, and I think maybe Musalia will tell us. For quite some time when we were in cabinet, you know, they were running on a very, very, very stringent budget, and yet he himself was obsessed with the question of keeping Kenya a united country, right? And had to balance up with those that had and those that didn't have. But I wouldn't quite speak on issues that I have not much knowledge of.
All right, let's take it to maybe where you should see it, and specifically, yes, pursuing the agenda of peace, love, and unity, uniting the country, talking to everyone in the country. But then again, the economy sort of appeared to escape him. I know you're very passionate about the economy, but how did that happen in the early 90s, of course, after even with the corruption scandal of the Golden Bag issue?
Well, I think in reality, sometimes people get to a comfort zone. And Kenya, in this context, I would like to say, because of the long period as a one-party state, there are some issues where people started imagining that leadership was to be taken for granted and so forth. So there are some policy issues that were supposed to be for the good of the country. And if I can quickly just address the issue of what was really Golden Bag, because Golden Bag was a policy that related to export compensation. It was supposed to promote value addition, and Kenyans who are involved in genuine export activities would then be supported by the government in terms of policy and in terms of some element of compensation for what they were doing. And this was a policy that was also being adopted by other countries in the region. So really what happened here is that people saw a loophole. Individuals saw a loophole on how not to use the policy properly, but to use it to exploit the Kenyan people. And this is how the story of Golden Bag came into place, that so much was going into compensation of this particular product, which is supposed to have gone through value addition. So this is a gap. Now, when I became Minister for Finance, I spent some time to try and understand it. And to the best of my knowledge, I went and I spoke to the President and I told him, what you may have been briefed about in the context of what was going on is not necessarily the truth.
Right.
And in the process, working with him, with his guidance, I was able to put Price Waterhouse to do an audit of this export compensation scheme. And the results became bare. And once they became bare and they were put before the President of the Republic of Kenya, he was very supportive in the drastic action that followed thereafter. Right. Closure of banks.
13 of them.
Scrapping of, yes, about 13 of them. Scrapping of the export compensation scheme. When the facts were put before him, as they should have been put, he acted.
And that's what I'm wondering, just before you go, that's what I'm wondering, what was the problem? Was it a capacity issue or he trusted so much?
Deception, my friend. Deception. You see, this is why I'm saying that people sometimes take it for granted, and maybe there were the people here who assumed that they could continue deceiving through the paperwork, through processes, but it eventually caught up with them. So it is, in my view, it was a difficult time. It cost us as a nation. But when the facts were laid on his table, Moi was very supportive in making sure that that export compensation scam was brought to an end.
Honorable Mzee, now that you're seated here, you're still very much active in the political scene today as the country continues to mourn the second president of Kenya. Here's the thing, at that time, he left the economy at the growth of what, about 0.6%, yet he inherited an economic growth from Jomo at 6.9%. As a former assistant, as a former finance minister, what are some of the things that you wish you'd have done then that probably would be eating the fruits today? Economically speaking, something that you also continue to voice even during the BBI meeting, the economy.
Yes, that is what and I'll continue to voice that.
Yes, so what
because what I would say is that the strength of any nation is really the ability of that nation to feed itself, the ability of that nation to provide employment, and so forth. So these are issues that I'll continue. Now, taken in context, Kenya was a nation that enjoyed what you might call perhaps a lot of goodwill from the international community during the Cold War period. You remember it was an East and West situation.
Right.
So you might say that international benefactors, for instance, were more involved in trying to secure political ground, that is this country for the East or for the West. Right. And they would perhaps get involved in programs without going into detail about the fundamentals of the economy. But when during Thatcher's time, Reagan's time, this is basically the time that everything had crumbled, and there was no East-West anymore. Now the new buzzwords became transparency and democracy and accountability. This started becoming the new vocabulary.
Okay.
So it is at this time that now things like aid were being frozen and so forth. And that then had an impact on the economy in many ways. I'm not saying that there was no corruption. Okay.
Is there something you wish you'd have done?
Who, me?
Well, yes, when you were finance minister under his cabinet?
Well, I did what I could have done. I could. Maybe I described myself short. The fact that I was able to bring down Golden Bag was no mean feat.
Right.
Yeah, and thereafter, remember, we were engaged in a very serious liberalization of the economy.
Okay.
We opened up the economy. We dismantled all the exchange controls. We dismantled price the the foreign exchange so that you could have more. We had central bank have a security of tenure. Governors could serve forever. But here now, a governor can only serve for 2 terms.
Right.
We introduced and brought into being the Kenya Revenue Authority. So a lot of things followed thereafter.
All right.
Yeah.
And I know be reflecting more on the economy of that time, including that person who served as the Minister in the Environment docket, whether this was having an impact in as far as running government is concerned.